Okay, hello, welcome back to what's the second video of what's going to be about 7 or 8 3D Studio Max videos, I imagine. If you'll notice, if you've been following along on the first video, this is not technically week 2, it's actually day 2 for me, but I'm expecting a good amount of work here in the next couple of weeks, so I want to get out as many videos as I possibly can now to keep you guys busy. Basically, for today, what I want to do is start creating some stuff. Mainly look at some modifiers. I also want to introduce the AEC components like the walls and the doors and the windows. One thing to note about those objects are usually we won't be using those too much after today, except for maybe your homework assignment. Simply because usually we'll be working from a Revit model or another 3D model, maybe even SketchUp or something that's been imported in for the most part to start off with. So usually the walls won't necessarily be constructed in 3D Studio Max, but I definitely want to show you that it can be done. I want to show you how the doors and windows relate to the walls. So I think we'll save that for the second half of the video. I think for the first half I really want to focus on some of the modifiers, the main modifiers that we're going to be using, and splines and lines and so forth. So I guess to start off, we'll go ahead and take a look at comparing the box, the methods that we can create these boxes. If you remember from last week's video, or I guess yesterday's video for me, they have the create tab here, and then you have your hierarchy of what you can create. So there's a couple different ways that we can create a box. Obviously we can come to geometry and select box and draw a box just like that. Okay, that's probably the quickest way, obviously. It doesn't get much quicker than that. And we can jump over to modify, if you remember, and make this more accurate. So if I wanted this to be a 5-foot box, I can enter those in here now after it's been created. Now there's another way to create a box, and it's based on modifiers and shapes. So I can go to the create tab, and this time go to the shape tab, and I'm going to actually create a rectangle. And I'm going to draw the rectangle over here to the right. Okay, that's just the basic 2D flat shape. If I go to my settings here, rendering, we're not going to really focus on. If we wanted to give this a thickness for rendering purposes only, we could adjust that here. This is more of like an advanced thing here, so we're not going to necessarily focus on that right now. This has to do with the, it's not really, you're not going to be able to see it with a square, but if we had a circle, this is where we would increase that. Remember the resolution of the facets that we were talking about. If we want to create another 5-foot by 5-foot box, obviously I'm going to make this my length and width 5 feet to match the other box. Okay, so we've got a 5 by 5 square basically. If we wanted to give a fillet on the corners here, we could add that radius here now. You can notice that it adds that radius to that square. We're not really interested in that right now, so that's going to stay at 0. Okay, so it's great. We have this nice shape here. We need to extrude it up. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to add an extrude modifier to this shape that will allow it to extrude up just like the box command. So I'm going to go to the modify tab. Remember, this is the modifier stack. And right now I have a rectangle, and that's it. So there's my square. So I'm going to add a modifier to that rectangle. And we want to extrude this, so I'm going to add an extrude modifier. And we want it to match this box, so I want to extrude this 5 feet. And you'll see it extrudes that square at 5 feet to match. So that's 2 ways that we can create that box there. Okay, so here in the extrude modifier we have a rectangle and extrude. Here we have a box, but they both lead to the exact same thing. The cap, start, and end under this extrude modifier are basically the top of the box and the bottom. If we don't want a top or bottom, we can take the cap off, and that's what the cap actually stands for there. And Usually I like to work with patches, so usually I'll change that to patch, but mesh is fine for now too. The remaining stuff has to do with texture, so we're not going to get into that again today. The segments are going to be only vertical segments here, so we're not necessarily going to be able to add the vertical segments just yet. If you remember, we were able to modify this in the very end of the last video, or not the very end, but when we were talking about the modifier of the edit poly modifier, we were able to edit that, and we'll be able to do that again here as we go along. But the segments in the extrude only deal with you can see the horizontal segments there, so you can control how many verticals there are there. And remember, the more segments you have, the more work the computer has to do. So for a box, you obviously don't need really any segments unless you're going to be cutting holes in these boxes. Okay, so that would be the extrude modifier, and you can extrude any shape that's closed. You could extrude a line if you wanted to, but the problem with that is it's going to be a surface. It's not going to be well-formed geometry. So I'm going to select a line this time, and down here in my creation method, if you want it to be a jagged line, you're going to leave this on corner. And notice when I click, I've got points. Okay, it's really sharp corners. This represents a corner. If I want it to be smooth, I'm going to change this to Bezier here. And now when I click and I hold in my mouse button, I can create these curves. But you have to hold in the mouse button to do that. And it takes a little getting used to. It's like Photoshop almost as far as the control points. So you can do that, and then you just right click when you're done, and that'll get you out of that command. So you can either draw your lines. I'm going to go ahead and make this big for a second. You can either draw your lines like this and then make them smooth, or you can change this to Bezier and make it smooth right off the bat. Usually I end up drawing corner first, and what will end up happening is I'll select my line here. And to turn this into a Bezier, you have to actually right click and I'm going to have to go into the sub-objects. So I'm going to go here, make sure I'm on my Modify tab, go to the vertices, and I select these individual vertices and right click. And I want to change this to Bezier instead of corner here. And that'll give me my control point to where I can modify that. And I need to turn on move as well. And that'll allow me to move this segment here, so I can, after I've actually already created these lines, I can come back and actually make these smooth by selecting the vertex sub-object here and right-clicking and changing those individually. So you don't technically have to draw from the start Beziers. You can come after the fact and add these in as well. You might notice how choppy that is. See how pointy that is? Okay, that's again just has to do with the interpolation or the amount of segments. And if we look over here, we can see that it has 6 steps by default. Notice as I take that up, that becomes smoother and smoother. And again, 32 is usually where I keep my curves. And that's much smoother now as far as the Bezier is concerned. So again, you just basically select the individual vertices and convert them as you need them. Pretty straightforward stuff. So if I now add an extrude modifier to this, you'll see it extrudes it, but it's considered a surface, not necessarily a solid. And what you'll find is you'll have problems rendering this when it doesn't have a thickness. Okay, everything needs to have a thickness. So if you're going to extrude a line like this, you need to give it a shell or something similar, because this won't render properly because it's just a surface. It's just a single line extruded. So therefore, if you can imagine that, it doesn't really have a thickness because you haven't really said how thick you want this line to be in reality. So the computer has a difficult time with this. So if we look up here, we'll see, there's a better way to do this. I want to see what a shell does. And you notice a shell gives that a thickness. And I can give it a thickness of however thick I want it to be. Plus the segment there to help smooth it out. So that gives that a thickness. Now this isn't really the way that I would do this. I wanted to show you another modifier basically. And we'll use the shell here later on for creating a quick version of the inside of a room. But you can see to add thickness you can use a shell modifier. Now what I would do is I would actually step back to my line in the modifier stack. Remember, we can step back and forth here. I would step back to my line, and on the line level I would select spline and select the whole thing. Okay, that by selecting spline, that will select the whole object. If I just select segment, it will select the segments in between the vertices. So by selecting spline, I select the whole thing. And if I scroll down here in my modifier stack, one thing to point out is when you're scrolling down, notice how I stay as far to the right as possible. That's because sometimes you'll get yourself in trouble. If you start scrolling in this area, notice it's a hand, but if I move to the left, it turns into an arrow, and if I click there, I can actually select a checkbox that I'm not even in. So you have to be careful where you are moving, or you'll get yourself in trouble by selecting things that you don't mean to. So make sure that you stay far to the right when you scroll down here. Scroll up and down. Alright, so I'm going to keep going down until I find outline here. Okay, outline is like an offset in AutoCAD. So if I want to give this line an offset, I can outline this however wide I want to. Notice I'm outlining that in now. Okay, so if I outline that in to about there, now I have the offset of the two lines, and I can come in here and clean up by selecting the vertex, these individual points, and make that a little more defined where I actually want it to be. So I have a little more control over this now, as far as the actual modeling goes of this line. So that looks good. Whenever you do something, whenever you complete a line like this, you should have one yellow dot here, and we'll look at adding more lines here shortly. But we want one yellow dot. That's a sign that this is closed, and obviously we want this to be closed before we extrude it, or we're going to end up with two planes instead of one, and then we definitely have problems. So one yellow dot is good, several yellow dots is bad, and we'll look at how we fix that here shortly. So now, after I've done that, I can step back to my extrude modifier, and you can see that now it even still has that thickness. So I can turn that on and off. So that's a good example of how you can step back in your modifiers and change things. Okay, so that's a brief introduction there to changing some of the line sub-objects here. If we look at some of the other properties here, actually, let's go ahead and move on from this. We'll look at these here in a second. Okay, let's look at the next modifier. Let's create the classic wine glass, as I like to say. So if you get stuck in here, you have to click on this until it's not yellow. Escape won't get you out of it. You actually have to physically come over here and click so that it's no longer yellow, and then you can hit escape to completely get out. Alright, so to create the classic wine glass, we can do this in just a quick few seconds here. I'm going to go to the front view. And if you've done any modeling before in the past, you're familiar with maybe what's called a revolve tool, or usually it's just revolve. However, 3ds 3D Max decided to be different, and they call theirs a lathe modifier. And you can think of like a wood lathe or a machinist lathe, how it basically you put a cylinder-shaped object in a chuck and it spins around really fast, and you have cutting bits that cut the shape symmetrically in the entire thing. So whenever you have something that's circular, like a Coke bottle or Pepsi bottle or a wine glass like we're about to do now, something that's completely symmetrical all the way around, 9 times out of 10 you'll want to use a lathe tool in Max for that. So again, I'm going to go to a front view, and I'm actually going to make this large so I can see, and I'm going to start roughly so that it's above the plane there. And I'm actually still in feet and inches. For this wine glass, no, that's fine. We'll keep it that way. I am going to come up here to show you to adjust this grid, though. I'm going to right click on the snap setting here and go over to home grid, and I'm going to do a grid spacing every inch. Okay, you can see that subdivides my grid now, so when I zoom in, now these grids are much smaller. So these are an inch, so this is 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. So that gives me an idea of how big I'm making this thing. So I'm just going to select my line tool, and I'm going to keep this on corner. Remember, I can come back here and turn Bezier on at any time. So whenever you use the lathe tool, you have to think in terms of just half the object. And we'll use this as, consider this to be our center point. So we're going to start here, and we're just going to draw half of that wine glass. So, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I guess since I'm teaching you this, I should probably go ahead and show you that route first. So I'm going to come up here and right click on snaps, and I'm going to turn on grid points. And I'm going to turn off edge segment. So grid points is the only thing that's on there. And if you remember from the last video, I'm drawing a 2D shape, so I want this to be 2. Okay, so now you can see I'm snapping to those grid points. So I'm at 0, 0, 0 right now. So what I'm going to do is click. All right, that's going to place my line there. Now from here, I can turn off the snaps. And remember, you can't come up here and click like you can in AutoCAD. To turn off the snaps while you have a line actually started, you can just hit S, and you can see that that turns off snaps. So I'm going to hold Shift, and when I hold Shift, you'll see that constrains this to 90 degrees, kind of like an ortho in AutoCAD. So when you're drawing, if you hold Shift with the line tool, it will keep it at 90 degrees. So I'm going to hold Shift and come out here to about maybe close to 2 inches or so. I'm not really worried about, again, precision here. And I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to come here, and I'm going to give it my stem. My stem can come up about there, and I can turn off Shift now. I can let off a Shift, and I'm just going to click there, and hold Shift again, and click here. And I am happy with that, so I'll right click. Okay, pretty rough wine glass, I'll agree, but we've got the capabilities to make this pretty nice. So select your selection tool or your move tool and jump to the modify tab. We have a line here. We're going to start modifying, especially we'll start with, let's actually start down here at the bottom. So we know that each one of these boxes, and I understand that you're looking on the video here, it might be hard to see, but I have an inch from here up to about here is an inch. So that tells me that this needs to be like maybe this thick. This is way too thick for the bottom of a wine glass. So I'm going to select segment, and I'll select that segment, and I'll move this straight down. Okay, so I've selected segment there, and just basically move that straight down to about a thickness that looks proportional to what I'm going at. You'll notice that this is where the artist in you will come out. There's no precision here by any means. We're kind of just making it look right. We know that this is about the right dimension from here to here, so we base everything off of that. And it's one of those things that just takes practice. So I'm going to select the vertex here. Okay, because I want that to be kind of rounded. I want to fill it there. So I'll select the vertex, and I'll come down here through the many options. Again, this is something that just takes practice. You'll have to feel your way through this stuff, and you'll see there's a fillet here and a chamfer. So if I want to add a fillet to this, I can increase this. And you see it's jumping to an increment of 6/30 seconds there. So if you wanted it to be something smaller, you'll have to manually type that in, like 3/30 seconds. and that gives me a little bit of a edge there. All right, and maybe 1/32 can go on the bottom. So I'll select this one and type 1/32 in here. Let's see, I don't know if it added it on there or not. It might be too small for my precision here. Shouldn't be a problem. But it looks like it's going to be a problem. Let's try 2/32 or actually just 1/16. Not really. That's alright, we'll keep that for now. We might come back and change that. So we have our first thing here. This is going to have a fillet, right? But before we do that, you have to think that this is actually half of the stem. So this needs to be much closer to this axis because we're going to revolve it around this axis. So this needs to be, like I said, much closer. So I'm going to select segment here so that I move the whole segment. And I'm going to slide that over to about there. And now I'm going to come down here and select vertex. Now I'm going to hit 1, and hitting 1 is the same as coming over here and selecting vertex. Notice if I hit 1, I select vertex. If I hit 2, I select segments. And if I hit 3, I select spline. So it counts from the top to the bottom. And this is true under any sub-object. So kind of get yourself used to hitting 1, 2, 3 here. It's a lot quicker than stopping what you're doing and coming over here. So from here on out, I'll announce that I'm changing, but I'll probably hit 1, 2, and 3 rather than come over here. So I'm going to add a much larger fillet to this. Not that large. 1 inch is way too big, so I'm actually maybe going to try 1/4 of an inch. That looks okay. Yeah, that's okay. And at this point here, at this vertex, you can see down here that I'm up 7 inches from the axis here, so the z-axis goes up in this direction, and I'm up, like I said, from here up 7 inches. So that's about right for a wine glass, so we can leave that as it is. Before I change this, I'm going to come over here, and remember, by right-clicking, I can change this to a Bezier and make that smooth. And now I kind of just sculpt out a nice curve here for this. I think of a wine glass just usually has the deep bottoms here. They only fill it up to like here. Whatever. So, and it kind of does curve back in up here at the top, but not necessarily that much. I think it maybe that looks good. I think. Well, yeah, that's about right. Maybe I'll move this over a little bit. That looks good. Yeah, I think that looks good. No, you could maybe throw a tiny fillet in there, but I don't think that it deserves one at this point. Maybe we'll come back later. Let's say that I wanted to refine this, though. I needed, for some reason, an extra point here for whatever reason. And we don't really need it in this case, but I'm going to select segment here. And I'm going to scroll up here to refine. And I'll select wherever I want that extra vertex to be and click, and that will drop a new vertex there. And then I uncheck that, and then I can modify this vertex here if I needed that extra point. But like I said, I don't really want that point there, so I'm going to select it and hit delete. And reshape this back to where it was. Okay, so we'll keep that for now. One thing to note is when we revolve this, we want this to be solid, right? And we want this to be open. We don't want we don't want to close. This shouldn't be hollow. The stem of a wine glass is solid glass for the most part, and down here is also solid. So what I need to do is I need to select and I actually don't think it's going to let us get away with this, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. I'm going to select Control to select both of these segments. And my fear was correct. Whenever you do a segment, you can't do an outline. You have to be on spline to do the actual outlines. So when these are grayed out, it just means that you're not on the right thing. Obviously, vertex, you can't do an outline. So in order to do this outline, it has to be on spline. And you'll see now spline's available. So I'll select this whole spline here, and I'll outline this about 0.125 inches. Okay, that gives us our thickness of our glass here. Now, like I was just saying, we don't want this to be hollow here, so we can actually select these extra segments and just hit delete on your keyboard to delete that. So we'll delete these out of the way. So we do not need those. And this little mess here. I box on all of it. Okay, and I want this to come over some more, so what I might do here is do segment and select this. Well, actually, I'll make segment and hit refine here. Drop a point right there, and I'll go back to vertex and select this. Whoops. Make sure I turn off refine first, then come to vertex and make sure this is on corner, and then I can move this straight over to about there. It could cross over a little bit. That's okay. You don't want it to cross over a lot, really. And I'll make sure this is somewhat nice and straight. So this point looks like it could come down some there. Maybe it's a little thicker here in the bottom, I think, than it is on the top, actually. So we'll give it a nice thickness here, and then it slowly comes up and gets thinner as it goes along. Now there should be some kind of curve up here. We can do 2 fillets if we want to, or we can draw an arc. Let's go ahead and experiment with that, since again we're learning. So let's take the legit approach, I guess, as you would say. So basically, to do this, we're going to have to create a whole nother line. So I'm going to go to New, and I'm going to create an arc this time. And I'm going to turn on my snaps, but I want to make sure that I turn off grid points and turn on edge, because I want to snap to the edge points of this. So I need edge snap to be on. And I have arc, and I need to turn this on. And there's my snap to those points. Actually, did I have... I lied. Not edge. That doesn't make any sense at all. Just strike that and select endpoint. I apologize. So we want endpoint to be on. Edge was almost like near. So now we're snapping. Now we're cooking with some gas. So I'm going to click and hold and go to this point, and then come up with this edge here to give this somewhat of a rounded top. Okay. And then turn off the arc by just hitting escape, and I'll hit S to turn off snaps, so that snap goes away. Okay, we've drawn this line. It's not actually connected. You notice we have 2 separate objects here. So you need to select either one of these. It doesn't technically matter which one you select. Since we've been working on this one, we'll select this. And I'm going to go back to modify, and you'll notice at the top of the geometry tab here, there's the attach. So I'm going to attach this. Okay, and then I'm going to uncheck that. And now you'll notice when I select this that they're the same object. But don't be fooled. When you do an attach, that doesn't mean necessarily anything. What that means now is that it's part of the same object. It doesn't necessarily mean these points are welded or attached together. So we need to go to the sub-object level here. And first of all, we don't need this segment anymore, so we're going to select it and hit delete. Okay, and remember what I just said a little earlier about having yellow dots. There's probably a couple more on here. This one's okay. That should really be the only one that we have, actually. Best thing to do in this case is just come out here, select vertex. You're going to want to select everything. And you're going to scroll down here to find weld. And you're going to do a weld. Now the tolerance is here, and you can see that we're working on a pretty small scale. So that tolerance might not be enough. So we might want to just turn that to 0 for now, and then hit weld. Let's see, it's still for whatever reason. I might have told you, let's see, let's change this, see if we can get 1/32 in here. Yeah, okay, there we go. So we need a little bit of tolerance there. 0 is too much. So you want to have some tolerance, 1/32. If you go too high, it will start welding pieces together. So if it's welding pieces that are close together, you need to lower your tolerance here when you do a weld. But anytime after you do an attach, you're going to need to weld those points afterwards. So that's a step that you'll always do. You'll do attach, and then you'll come down here, you'll select vertex, and then you'll select all the vertices, even though they're not part of it, and select weld to weld that. Now this is one solid object. Alright, and everything else looks pretty good. We'll come back and change. I'm going to actually select vertex, and I'm going to drag, whoops, I'm going to hit 1 to select vertex and drag a box around these. Notice I have these all selected. Now I'm just going to move all the vertices to the right some to make this bottom a little bit bigger. Maybe to about there. So you can move all of these different points of this line. So that looks like we've got the nice half of that wine glass. So now we can add a lathe modifier to it and see what else we need to adjust. So I'm going to jump here to my modifier stack, find lathe, right here. And it gives us an initial guess of right there, and it's a pretty good guess, pretty wild wine glass. If you remember from yesterday's video or last week's video, for those not on my time scale, plus sign here has sub-objects, so there's the axis of this. So if we want to adjust where it's rotating, we can select axis and move that, and we notice I can move that axis to revolve anywhere. We want to get that as close to the origin as possible. So I'm going to actually change this to 0. And you'll notice that line's, this is my x coordinate system. So my x-axis, notice I have x in this direction, so I change the x value because it goes this way. And that lines that up with the origin there. And you can see we got a little carried, or I got a little carried away here on the bottom. But the beauty of this modifier stack, again, I can't stress enough, is I can jump back here. I can even turn on this show end result here and model with the end result on if I want to. So I can come in here and select these vertices and move this in. And I can zoom out here to get a better idea. So I can start to sculpt this thing now that I have 3D. And again, that's thanks to this show end result. That will show you what's above in the stack. Without that on, you won't be able to see the lathe. You'll only be able to see the lines, which is fine. It just depends on what you want to use. Sometimes this can be a little confusing. And I can see here that I need to move these guys in a little bit. And actually, this whole thing looks kind of fat, so I'm going to move this. I need to make sure, remember, I offset those lines, so I need to make sure I select both of these vertices now. And again, because we have the lathe on, we don't have to worry about this side. We only need to adjust one side, and the symmetry takes care of itself. And again, this looks a little fat here, so I'm going to move this in. Looks pretty good. Good. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to change my viewport here. And there you can see that it's revolved itself all the way around. Now whenever you have something selected, if you want to zoom to that object, select the object and just hit Z on your keyboard, and you'll notice that all of the viewports will align to that. So I can hold Alt here and zoom around this thing. Now, why do we think that it's so steppy? A wine glass isn't that steppy, is it? The last time I checked, I don't think so. Maybe back in the old days. So we need to adjust that. So this is something that will be taken care of, obviously, in the lathe area. So I'm going to go to the lathe, and right here, notice that I said for anytime that we do something that's circular or like spherical, we're going to want to at least do a minimum probably of 32 here if it's going to be in the foreground. So I'll boost that up to 32. And now you'll see that it's a lot better there. It could even maybe go up a little bit more. 45 works. I can weld the core, which will basically take those points away. Usually that's a good idea. We've already aligned. Actually, I'm going to hit undo there. It's going to align the... whoops. It's not going to let me undo that, so I'm going to change this back to 45. And I'll select my axis here and move this back to 0. When I did the align, it's going to align to the center of the drawing. So usually you can do the max. I think the max. No, max is going to take us the other way. Min. There we go. So the min pretty much takes you to the end of the drawing. I still like to use axis here because I like it to be just right at 0. And you notice it moved over a little bit. So usually I'll do this manually with the axis, but this will also do the minimum, the maximum, and the center of your drawing. Okay, and we'll leave that unmeshed, that's fine. So just taking another look at this thing. Whoops. Taking another look at this thing. I need to turn this back to front. So pretty straightforward using the lathe modifier. Again, anytime that you're going to have something that's symmetrical like this, that's round, the lathe modifier is what you're going to want to use for that. And I've showed you definitely an amazing technique of being able to step back here and make sure that your you show end results on. And that will allow you to modify this while you can actually see the 3 dimensions. So you really have the power of being a true sculptor in a sense. There's a huge chalice and maybe a little wine glass. Now we almost have a lamp on a different scale, and there's actually a Hershey kiss on top of a stick. So you get to have a lot of fun with this once you get the basics down. It's a lot of fun. So go ahead and mess around with this, and we'll take a break and come back and start looking at some other stuff here. Alright, so let's go ahead and move forth and look at some other modifiers. I'd like to look at the sweep modifier. The sweep modifier comes in handy when you are creating, let's see, in an interior scene. A sweep modifier comes in handy when you create things like base trim or crown molding or chair rail or anything that has a profile that sweeps around basically a path. Is what a sweep is. And if you're familiar with maybe, let's see, SketchUp, a similar feature to SketchUp would be the Follow Me tool. So a sweep is basically a profile and a path. So as fun as this wine glass was, I'm going to delete that and start fresh here. What I'm going to do is basically start off with a line. So I'll go to my shapes tool and then go to line, and I'll just draw. Actually, since I don't want to take the time to actually go back and do that, I'm going to change this to Bezier now. And then I'll click and hold in. Remember, you have to click and hold and move this around. Okay, so there's a path. We can all agree that that's just like a piece of string laying on this plane, basically. So you can consider this a path to my sweep. So I'm going to go to modifiers and select sweep. Okay, and by default we've got this crazy shape going on here, so we need to do a little bit of adjusting here. So you can see by default I'm using a build-in section. These are something that Max has provided for us. If we have our own profile, which I'm going to show you here in a second, we can use custom, but let's look at kind of what they have here. Like if you were going to do a simple base trim, like, you know, just like a 5/8 by 5-inch base trim or something, you could select a bar and scroll down a little bit more, and you can see now we have some parameters here that we can change. So again, if we were going to do 5/8 base trim, I could do a width of 0.625, and I could do a length of 5 inches. And we're zoomed in here real close as far as scale goes, so it looks really large still. But this is 5/8 of an inch thick and 5 inches high is what this represents. And again, if I want more steps here, I can boost this up to make this smoother. It looks good there. Now you can see, remember our path, when we created our path, it's actually on that plane, right? So it's lying on that plane. So you can see by default the sweep has the path right in the center. Okay, and that's what this pivot point is stuff here. If I wanted the sweep to be up higher to where the corner, the lower corner of this went through my path, I could select this as my pivot point. And notice now the path is going through this part of my profile, back to the center where it was. So now the path is going through the center of this sweep. So I can adjust that sweep wherever I want. I can also flip it back and forth if it's not in the right direction, which with a rectangle we're not going to see. If we had a crown profile, we'll see better when we get that in here. Okay, so this is how we make those adjustments. Banking, we're not really going to see with this profile either. It has to do with how Max handles the curves, whether you stay perpendicular or tangent. Again, you're not going to see the effect with the rectangle, so maybe we can get that to show an effect with crown molding. Okay, so some of the other basic shapes that you have in here, these are just the basics. Make this smaller. So, not that small. So this is an H-beam here, an I-beam or whatever, so a little big still. There we go, right. Oh, too much. Right there. So there's your sweep of that I-beam on that path. So sweeps are really handy. You can see when you have a profile that you want to go like all the way around a room, for instance, if you had crown molding. A good example of that. Let's go ahead and look at that now. The way that I like to handle crown molding is usually I'll draw it in AutoCAD. You can draw it in Max if you want to. You can bring in pictures in Max, but the reason that I like to draw it in AutoCAD is because you can scale to a reference in AutoCAD easily, whereas in Max it's a little more difficult, and you can trace easier in AutoCAD. So I'm actually going to open up AutoCAD here, and if I knew my own computer where my stuff was, it would help. Apps, and I'm going to go to AutoCAD. In the meantime, I'm going to go here on the internet and I'm going to just go to Google for now. And I'm just going to type in crown molding, and I'll go to images. Actually, I don't want crown molding. I want crown molding profile. There we go. So let's pick out one here that we like. It doesn't really matter what size it is. You need to have dimensions on it, though. It needs to have sizes. What's this? Can we see that, or is it just blurry? I don't know if we can see those or not. I don't think. Do I have a zoom here? No. Okay, we'll go back. This is the same company, I think. at least have sizes. Okay, so then we have our dimensions there. So we'll copy this. So I'll just hit copy image, jump into AutoCAD, and just hit Control V to insert this guy and click anywhere. So we have our profiles here. Usually I'll create a trace layer. Make this as painless as quick as painless possible. Trace, and I'll try and do this in Max for those that you don't have 3D or AutoCAD as well. It's a little more tedious, but it can be done. Try and do both versions. So I'll keep my image on my layer there, and this one looks good. So I'll turn on my workflow here and just pretty much rough this guy in here. Turn off ortho, get this diagonal line. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, nobody's going to come into your 3D Studio Max model and measure your crown radii or whatever and say, oh, that's not right. You want it to look right. It doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I think I just accidentally moved something there. I'll do that. But I like to use AutoCAD to trace this kind of stuff, again, because it's easier in many areas. So technically, you should draw individual arcs here. We'll go ahead and just use a spline tool because it's a lot faster. And you just click basically every so often. Overhang that and hit enter until it clears out. And I'll do that again down here. Alright, and basically now let's just trim this up. So TR for trim. And I don't need that anymore, I don't need that anymore. I can delete these other segments here. This guy's a little off. I don't want it to be that far off. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it doesn't need to be sloppy either. That's better. One more line here. Turn on ortho. Turn this off. Alright, I'm not going to worry about the fillets here right now, although we could do that if we wanted to. So we know, because we have a dimension here, that we can scale this thing to a reference of 3/4 or 4 1/4. 4 1/4 being, depending on how they measure it, everybody measures these things different sometimes, and it's hard to tell how they actually measure these. Let me jump back here. So they're showing a projection here. Projection and drop. So they're showing projection. So we have a projection here from this point to that point. We have a projection of 2 and 17/32. We'll just say 2.5 for that. So we'll change that to 2.5 for projection. Okay, so if you're not familiar with scales, you just type scale, select everything, right click, specify a base point of anywhere, and you'll notice down here we want to use a reference scale because we know a dimension that we want to scale to. So I'll hit R for reference, and I know this dimension, right? I know from here to here is the 2.5, so I'll come in here and say that I know from here, and I want to come up here with my snap and make sure that that's nice and straight across. There we go. So I know that that's 2.5, and I'll hit enter and then zoom extents, and we can test ourselves here with a dimension maybe. 2.5 inches there. Okay, so we can delete that, and we can turn off this other layer that I put this on, and we're left with just our profile. Now I can select this and type W block, which writes a block to a file. I can pick a spot here. Web video week 8, and we'll call this our crown. AutoCAD, just to be safe, I'll usually save this in an earlier version. Sometimes you have problems opening files, especially with SketchUp. So save that maybe in an earlier version. That should actually be DWG. Doesn't have, so 2004 is fine. And that's all good, so I can hit OK there. Now that saves that to its own file. Now I can come back in here to Max. And did I delete my profile here too? I want to keep my profile. I'm going to delete that sweep and keep my line. And I'm basically just going to come up to my thing here and do an import. You'll see there's a bunch of different formats here. AutoCAD being one of those. DWG, DXF here, and go to wherever I put that. That's my crown, so I can open that. I'm not really going to go through this now. We're going to look at this later. So for now, I'm just going to hit OK. And you'll notice that that's dropped here. Inside of Max is just a CAD file, basically. It's a spline. It's editable. We can edit everything that we've edited before. That, because we use the spline here, we have more points. That's why I said it would be better to use an arc. But for the sake of showing you this with a little bit of speed, I wanted to just quickly go through that. But again, we can check. We know that these blocks are 1 inches, or 1 inch, 1 inches. Each block's 1 inch, so we have about 1, 2, and about 1/2. So we're good with our scale at 2.5 there. So I don't need to line this up. Some programs you have to line it up, but you can actually just select your line and go and add a sweep modifier to that. And remember, this time we're going to come here and select a custom section. And we're going to pick here. We could also pick from a list if we wanted to, but it's right here, so we can just pick it. Alright, and that's, we'll sweep that along that line. I'm going to hit Z to zoom. And you can see that we have some issues here we can correct. Uncheck banking first of all. It just might be too tight of a radius on our path, to be honest. You wouldn't really have a crown profile like that necessarily. Maybe you would on furniture. It didn't really help out too much. That's fine where that's at. I can move this manually if I want to by selecting the line pivot, but that looks fine. I think the problem is that that radius is just too sharp for this. So what I'm going to actually do is step back to my line here and select the vertices and stretch this out a little bit. So it's a little smoother and see if that helps. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so there it sweeps that profile. So you can see if you had a room, you would want to use this for your crown or on your room to sweep that crown profile. And you can adjust where it's aligned. Or again, if you wanted to mirror it, you can see I can mirror now that I actually have a profile. I can flip this along that. So I can make all of the adjustments necessary if the profile doesn't come in right. The important part to remember is you don't have to align this profile. This profile can be anywhere and you can select it. And you can put it on its own layer and turn it off now that you don't need it, or just put it somewhere, or you can actually even just delete it if you want to, if you know you're not going to use it anymore. I recommend you keep it somewhere in case you need it again for doing your sweeps. So the I think that's basically, I think I've covered all of the sections in here. The one thing, if sometimes you'll have a path here that if you do custom especially, you'll have your open ends. You can add a modifier called cap holes. Ugh, it's not liking that at all. Well, usually you can do cap holes. Let's see here. What's causing this problem? You see how this is open? This is the problem here that I'm trying to correct. And I'm wondering if it has to do with maybe how we had our sweeps here. Okay, well, next step, I'll delete this here. And we'll add an edit poly modifier to this guy. Let's see my vertices here, select vertex. Oops, not on the line, I'm sorry, up here under edit poly. So we've got a lot of vertices going on here. And again, that's just simply because the way that I created the profile. It would be best if you use arcs in the future here. It might save some of these problems. See if the cap holes will exit now. No. Alright, there's no really a whole lot of ways out of this. I'm going to chalk this up to the mistake being here without the arcs, and that's the best I can come up with now. I'm not really sure why. I've never really had that effect happen. Maybe I'll research this in the meantime. It's not a huge deal unless you're going to see the edge of this. If you're going to see the edge of this, this is a problem. If you're not going to see the edge of this, it will still render fine, being a solid. It's just unfortunate that that happens to be that way. So let me check in on that. In the meantime, this is still okay, but this isn't okay. So let me check on that. We'll keep moving ahead here with this. But the sweep modifier is definitely a powerful tool that you can use, especially in the interior design field as far as the trims, the bases, and stuff like that. Alright, so delete this guy, don't need it anymore. The next thing that I want to look at is the Boolean tool, and it's not necessarily a modifier, but I want to look at this before we move on to the walls. Boolean, basically you have three options. You have, and this is true with any Boolean, you have your union, you have a subtraction, and you have an intersection. Okay, so, and this is nice when you have a ceiling and you want to put like recessed cans in it or something, or some complex shapes or whatever. So I'm going to start off with a box here, and I'm going to make it just a big rectangle. Get rid of this profile here that's hanging out. whoops, profile. Okay, and let's say that I wanted to, I don't know, cut some holes in this thing. So I would select cylinder. And let's just do a couple of them here. One thing to point out with these cylinders are by default they're really rough, so if you want it to cut smooth, you need to make sure that you set up your segments with your sides here to 32 so they're nice smooth holes. And notice how I move that down so that it goes all the way through that. Alright. Do another one over here. And I just want this to be a copy. So remember we talked about the copy and instance thing in the last video as well. Copy is a complete different entity. Instance kind of has a link to where parameters can still be switched between the two. So if you want them to be completely different from each other, you'll select copy. And I'll go to new. And a Boolean is actually a compound object. So on your drop down here, you go to compound objects and select your main object, your base object. Okay, I want to cut holes, and so I want to cut one hole, and I want to union this one. So this is going to be my base object because this is the object that I want to be affected. So I'll select that first, and I'll select Pro Boolean here. Boolean is the original. This was a little bit newer. This came along a little bit after this one, so this one's a little more evolved. I like to use the Pro Boolean because it gives you the ability to step backwards when you need to, or extract your operands. This one does too, but I feel like Pro Boolean is a little more solid, so I usually select that. So I've got my base object selected here. So next I want to make sure that I'm on subtraction because I want to cut a hole through this. So I'm on subtraction. So I need to start picking what I want to cut. So I want to cut a hole here. And notice that I'll select this again. That cuts a hole through that box. Okay, all the way through. So the Boolean subtraction does just that. It subtracts one shape from another. Now on the other hand, if I do a union, I'll change this to union and start picking. And if we look at, let's see, notice how this shape goes all the way through here. And we have these lines here in the center. If I union this thing, so I've got union selected, I have start picking selected, and I select this box. Notice those go away, basically because now this is one solid object. Okay, this cylinder has now become part of this box. So now that's one solid object, so I can uncheck start picking. And you can see even when I select that, escape here a few times. When I select either one of those, it selects the whole object as one. So now that has become one object with the union there. So you can continue that as much as you want. If I want to draw on top of this guy here, I can come over here, standard, and do a cylinder. And the quick way, without actually creating new planes or doing the math, is turn on auto grid. And you'll notice that I automatically switch to on top of this face. I switch to whatever face I'm on. So auto grid will allow you to snap to those faces and draw on those faces. That will help you with some shortcut as long as, as far as math goes. So now I can draw right on that top of that plane. And I can turn auto grid off when I'm done. So now I've drawn directly on top of that guy, which is what I wanted. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and now modify this cylinder. And I'm going to do a negative height here so it goes all the way through this other one. And I'm going to move it up so it sticks out of the top and it sticks out of the bottom. And I'll come here and do a subtraction. So you see that cuts all the way through there. So because that was one solid object, so now I have a through hole basically there. So your operands are kind of stored in here for when you need them, if you need them at later times. Your operands are down here. So you can see I can move that away from my operand. I can change orientation and so on and so forth. And I can extract those operands if I want to. See the base. I have the base selected there, so that's not going to work. So I can extract anything with the base, obviously. If I need that guy back, I can take it out. Notice that undoes that. If you use a Boolean, you don't really have that capability. So Pro Booleans are better to use in this situation. The last one to look at here would be the intersection. There's some other things here. These are the three main ones. These have been around for centuries in different languages, basically, but even in mathematics, linear algebra and stuff like that, or computer logic, digital logic, anything like that. Same idea, same principle. These guys are just kind of additional. So intersection, and then start picking. It leaves whatever is intersected, which in this case isn't much, just a cylinder. So whatever this is touching this, that's what it leaves. And we can see that it is only touching in this area, this cylinder here, so not a huge thing. Usually you only use union or subtraction to create these things. But you can see where if you had let's say if I create a new box here, and let's pretend that this is our ceiling, and I had I wanted to create recessed lights inside of the ceiling. I could come in here and draw my cylinders, and then obviously come over here and change my radius to maybe 6 inches, and maybe a height of 6 inches. Actually, this radius should be 3 inches if I want a 6-inch diameter. Sides, I definitely want to be at least 45, because whenever you do recessed lights like this, you're going to actually have a light up in that pocket. So you want to make sure that you have a nice smooth edge there, or the light will catch a jagged edge and produce a jagged shadow. So you want to make sure that these are definitely smooth. And I'm going to make this an inch bigger than it needs to be, and I'm going to drop it out a tiny bit. So you can see I like to overhang the edge a little bit just to make sure it trims all of that edge. Sometimes you won't get all of the face there, and you'll be left with some edges. So I'm going to just hit shift here, hold shift in, I'm going to make copies, but I'm going to make like 10 copies or something. Yeah, all the way across there. Okay, so if I'm going to put some recessed cans in here, I can select my base object, come to the modify here, or I'm sorry, the new compound objects, Pro Boolean, and I want to do a difference or a subtraction, and I'll start picking, and I'll just pick these individually all the way down through here. So you see the holes appearing there, and then uncheck that, and then hit escape. So you'll see we have our recessed pockets to put lights in for recessed can lighting. And we could even do little metal inserts that go up in there if we wanted to. For example, with maybe a tube or something. Go to standard objects, go to tube, and zoom in on one of these guys. Actually, try and zoom in on the first one and get this as centered as possible. You don't actually have a center snap like in AutoCAD. You have a center face, but you don't actually have a center point. I don't think any of these are necessarily going to work. Let's see if I can get either one of those to work. No. So, well, actually, I need to turn this on. So you can see I don't actually have a snap that will allow me to snap to the inside of that circle. We can use the align tool to do that, though. So I'll just draw a tube here on the inside. Maybe make it a little bit bigger and give it a thickness, and then a height of 6 inches, right? So to modify here and change the height to 6 inches. And position it the best that I can, and I need to boost this up to 45 as well so it's smooth. You can see the other diameter, the first radius here needs to get bigger. It's okay if it extrudes into the ceiling a little bit. The height can be a little bit bigger as well. And if it goes into the ceiling like that, I don't really need to worry about it necessarily being aligned. And it looks like it's okay for the most part, so I'm okay with that. One thing that I will do is move this down to give myself maybe a little gasket. And I'll again make this height bigger so that it goes up to the inside of the ceiling there. And I'll find this little guy. I'm going to actually change the color of this to maybe like gray for now, so that I can see the difference between my ceiling. And I'll make my ceiling white. So my white, and then I have my little can here. And then we can take this one step further by selecting your can that you just, or your tube that you just made, and adding an edit poly modifier to that. We talked about this a little bit last week. So edit poly is like, you remember how we were editing the actual splines? The edit poly modifies geometry. So the edit spline modified the two-dimensional line, where edit poly has the sub-objects as well that we can modify. And what I want to do is create kind of a flange here that this comes out a little bit larger in this area. So what I might do here is go to Edge, and you can see I have an edge that goes across here, right? So I'm going to select a box around that edge. So I've just selected that edge, and if I hit Z, now that I have that edge selected, I can zoom into that nice and close. I'm going to change this to wireframe, so you can see kind of the two loops that I have there selected by dragging that box. And I'm going to move that straight down, so I can move those edges anywhere I want. And I'm going to move it so that it comes out just underneath of there. So I've just moved those segments down below that line. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is change this to polygon. Now I'm going to select all of these polygons. Whoops, I'm going to make sure I see all of it. Now I'm going to select all of these polygons. So because I moved that edge down, now I'm only selecting below the ceiling. If I wouldn't have moved that edge down, that edge would have been up here, and my polygon would have been much larger. So by moving that line down, I'm able to make my polygon selection smaller. Now if I want to make a gasket here, I can experiment with different things. We might be getting into trouble here as far as the one segment goes. Let's go ahead and give scale a try and see what happens here. So you can see I'm making the flange bigger on the bottom there, but I'm not necessarily making it correct because this is coming out. So let's look at some other options that we have here. Extrude, beveled, none of those are what we want necessarily. We might try extrude here and group normals. That way we're grouping everything together there. And it's extruding in the opposite direction. Let's see here. Alright, so what we'll do in this situation is we'll grab this other line up here and maybe try and drag this down so that it's closer to this other one. Okay, we'll get that to where it's nice and close. And then when I select my polygons there, I want to make sure that it's not selecting that other line, and now I can throw a scale on there. That's a little better. It's going to have to be a lot bigger, but you can see now I have kind of a gasket in there. A little bit bigger than my hole. It says I would probably actually, remember the lathe that we just went over? You might want to use a lathe to create one of these. After you create one of them, you can just get out of that there. You can copy as many as you want. hold down the shift. Now this time I'm going to do instance in case I want to change one. That way it will change all of them. I'll do instance and I'll do like 6 of them. Some of them might have not lined up right, so you'll have to do a little bit of adjusting there. Alright, that's good for... so you can see we've copied those recessed cannons there out. You would need to move this guy over some there. Alright. So that is the extent of the modifiers I want to cover today. A lot of stuff, I realize. We still have to do the walls, windows, and doors things. So let's go ahead and take a break and come back to that in a bit. Alright, so let's go ahead and move forward here and start looking at the walls, windows, and doors. I just wanted to point out one thing about the video series that I've been creating here. I've looked around at some other similar tutorials, even in the past while learning the software myself. And one thing I noticed is most tutorials obviously are tutorials that focus on one thing. So when you see my videos, usually my videos are much longer, and I talk more through them because I want you to actually learn the program, the ins and outs. That's why we're going in a certain order and a format, because it's great to learn how to create one thing, but that's just kind of one view towards it. So I want to try and bring as many views to the table as possible, and that's why the videos are so much longer. And I talk so much more, kind of talk you through the process, because I want you to understand the program. I don't want you to understand how to make something, basically is the point there. Now with these walls, these aren't something that I use often, and I'm gonna show you why, but they are handy in certain instances. But the main reason you're not going to use these is because usually, and I say usually when I speak in terms of an architect or an interior designer or interior architect, usually we have a Revit model that's already been created, right? So, or even a SketchUp quick model or something. Usually there's already some form of 3D model that we can import in here. So the walls, for the most part, will already be created. What we use 3D Studio Max for, and for interior renderings especially, and even architectural renderings, is to add the details, the organic modeling, the furniture that you can't create in Revit because you're limited with organic modeling and polygons and so forth. So you bring your model into Max and make it more realistic in that fashion. You also add more realistic materials. And even though programs like Revit have their built-in rendering engines that have actually come a long way and actually do a decent job, external plugins like V-Ray, and even Mental Ray do a much better job. So, and even when it comes to lighting and so forth, it's a lot easier in Max to make those adjustments versus Revit. So it's a two-step process, really. You use the programs together, and we're going to actually, next week, the next video, we're going to look at importing Revit files. This week, we're going to maybe import a CAD file, maybe, and like I said, we're going to finish off this video with walls and windows. So I'm going to select wall here, go to my top view, and one thing right off the bat that I want to point out is if I click here to draw a wall, you'll notice if you try to hold shift like we did with a line earlier, it doesn't constrain this. That only works with a line. So we're kind of stuck when we want to draw straight lines. When we want to draw straight walls in 3D Studio Max, two methods, actually three methods that I know of that work well. The first method is by inputting points individually, so like 0, 0, 15, 0, 15, 15, back over. So you enter your actual Cartesian points. The second method is using the grid snap and snapping to the grid points, which works if you have a nice, if your walls always end up on a grid point, which usually doesn't happen. So I mean that's messy doing it that way. And the third way, which is the most solid way, is to import an AutoCAD file of a 2D plan and kind of trace that and snap to the plan, and that will allow you to sketch that out 3 dimensions. So the first method, keyboard entry, you can see the first point is already in here at 0, 0. So if you wanted to start drawing at the origin, you would just hit add point, and that will drop a point here at 0, 0. Let's say we're just going to do a 15 by 15 room. So my next point would be if I go counterclockwise here, my next point on the x-axis is going to be 15, 0, right? So that's going to be 15 in the x direction. It's going to be 0 in the y direction because we don't want it to come off of this axis yet. And I'll add another point, and you'll see that drops that wall in there. So the next point that I want is actually going to be 15, 15, and I'll add a point, right? Because that's 15 over and 15 up, and that's the next point. So the next point will be 15, and x will be 0. So you can see this is a pain in the rear for especially designers, is being able to just sketch straight walls quickly. At this point, you can just hit close and finish there. So where did it go here? There we go. So you can see we've successfully created our walls. If we go to the edit the object here, we have some sub-objects of this wall that we can actually manipulate now. The profile is where you're going to, let's see, sorry, under segment, you're going to be able to adjust the height of this wall individually, depending on if you just wanted one side to maybe be higher, like 16 feet on this side. You'll see that side of that wall goes up to 16 feet. Or you can select all of them and change all of them to 16 feet individually there. Remember, hold Control in 3D Studio Max to select more than one thing, and you can get the last two with one shot there. Okay, so in the profile here, I should be able to select my well, no, that's not necessarily going to work for that. Vertices. Everything's based off of the bottom here, if you notice. Walls are really just, it's unfortunate how the walls are set up in 3D Studio Max, how these function. But I'm going to show you why you would actually want to use the walls. Okay, so we have our 16-foot wall here, so we need to add doors and windows to this little room. So I'm going to minimize this for now. And I'm going to go to New, and we'll add a door first. We have 3 different options here. We'll start with a pivot door, which is just a normal swing door. You can see the creation method here is important. So it's saying width, depth, height. And what this is this is your click order. So the first click is going to be your width, the second click is going to be your depth, and finally your third click will be your height. And you can change that if you want to. But usually this is fine. I'm going to show you how we do this. It's very tricky. The windows and doors are very touchy, so it's important that you follow these steps exactly. And we'll come back and add we'll modify these after we actually place the door. So the way that these AEC components are set up is you actually have to make sure that you snap perfectly to the inside edge and the outside edge in order for the door to cut through. And what I mean by cut through is, let me go ahead and try and place a door here. So I'll place a door in the same order as it suggested. Now notice I can't hold shift to keep this straight either, so this is going to be crooked if I just try and place this like this. So, and then I come here and I say, there's my door. And you'll see that it's a short door right now, but you'll notice that it's not cutting through the walls. You see what I mean? The wall is still going through it. I'm going to make this wall height, or this height of this door a little higher so you can see it. And I'll go ahead and change the color of this door so we can see it as well. Blue and red, how about that? The Ronald McDonald House. So you can see the wall is interfering there with the door, right? It's not cutting, where the whole door should be red, not just the frame. So that is not cutting, and it's not cutting because you have to use edge snaps to create these. And that's why you need to follow these steps exactly the way that I'm showing you here. And 2 snap will work just fine. So we just need to make sure that we turn on edge segment and turn off grid points. Okay, now with this selected, we can come out here with the pivot door. We might have to actually turn that on. And you'll see that I'm snapping to that edge, and it doesn't matter where I necessarily snap it. Okay, usually you'll have an AutoCAD plan underneath of this. Like I said, for this, the third step, you'll have an AutoCAD plan to where you can snap to that opening and place your door wherever you want to. We do, however, know that the center of this is 0, 0, and this is offset 2.5 inches, so we can also place it by adding some numbers. But let's go ahead and just get the door in there for now. So if you remember, the creation method is width, depth, and height. All right, so I'm going to do the width, then the depth, and then let go and do the height. So I click and hold in. I haven't released the mouse yet. To about there. It doesn't matter. We can come back and change the width. It could be this wide. It doesn't matter. And then you come over and notice I'm snapping to the other side of the wall now. I release the mouse, so I come over here and then I click and then I let go and I just go up just a tiny bit. Okay, now I can come over to the Modify tab and I can change my height to 7 feet here, which standard door height there, 7 feet. And my width obviously doesn't need to be 7 feet unless I had a double doors. We'll make this 3 feet. So that looks more like a door there. And again, we'll change the color so we can see that this is actually cutting. So we'll change this pivot door to back to red. Let's see. Whatever. Looks like, is it not cutting again? That should have cut just fine. All right, so you can see that it's a difficult process, and it might take a couple tries even for me. So you can see it's trying to cut there on the inside, but it hasn't quite cut through there. So basically, select the door and delete it, and we'll try this again. If you get that error, the door, usually what happens if you try and place a door and you do it with the snaps and you follow every step the way you're supposed to and it still doesn't work, usually the wall's flipped inside out, so you need to, instead of starting on the inside of the wall, start on the outside of the wall. So let me try that again on the outside of the wall and turn on my edge snap and try this process again. And this time go to the inside. Okay, there, definitely cut through there. So I'm going to change my height here to 7 feet and my width to 3 feet. Okay, I don't need to adjust the depth at all because if you adjust the depth, you'll mess it up because remember we just snapped to there for that reason. So you can see that that has actually cut through. So if you attempt to do it from inside to out and it doesn't work, try outside to in. Sometimes, like I said, if your wall face is reversed, you'll run into that problem. No big deal. And now I'm going to change the color of this door. There we go. So now we have a completely red door. And you can see that it's pretty detailed as far as, panels, and we can adjust this under the modify. If I wanted like a 4-panel horizontal door, for example, you can see there's all kinds of parameters here. This is the actual door frame. If you don't want a frame, you can turn that off. If you want a frame, usually you'll have some sort of frame, but sometimes you might have a custom frame. And remember, well, we would have to default back to maybe a sweep or something for a custom frame. The frame that this gives us is kind of basic. So I want to keep my frame on. I notice I can flip the swing of this door if I want it to be swing inside to out. I can also flip the hinge from left to right if my doors, my handle's on one side, and I can open this door if I want to. Usually when you do renderings, sometimes, I'm not even going to say that because it depends on what you want to do. If you want to have a rendering with the door half open or open, go for it. If not, you can see here that you can make that adjustment. So there's the swing on the right side. If I flip the hinge, you'll see now it's hinged on the other side. Okay, so these are your leaf properties here where I was talking about with the panels. I'm actually going to close this door so we can see what's actually going on here. And you'll see that right now there's only one panel. I want 4 panels horizontal. So you can see I've subdivided that door into 4. And by default it's glass, but if we want like nice thick wood panels, we would change this to bevel. And you'll see now we have those nice panels. So this is the upside to working with walls, is being able to use these doors. Now, can you use these doors with other things like just standard boxes? The answer is yes, but you need to create remember, a Boolean or something to create the opening the exact size that you need. By using the snaps and by using the AEC geometry, and remember this door will only work with this wall. When I say that, I mean automatic cut. It will cut through the wall automatically if it's an AEC wall and an AEC door. If this was a box, we would have to use a Boolean to hollow out that shape and then place the door in there manually and make sure everything fits right. So the advantage of using walls is actually using the doors and windows. Let's go down here. These are just parameters you can experiment with. I'm not going to go through all these now, but there's the options to make as many changes as you want. So let's go ahead and now that this door is placed, I had said, if you remember, that this was 0, 0, right? So I'm going to hit S to turn off snap. I know that that was 0, 0. It looks like the point here. Looks like you would have to do some math to offset that a certain distance. So I know that this is 0, 0. The wall thickness is 2.5. So let's say that I wanted this to be over like 5. I wanted this to be 2 feet from the. Let's say 2 feet from this wall here. So I would need this to be at 24 inches plus the thickness of the wall. So it would actually have to be 26.5 inches. And you can see right now on the X axis here, we're at 7 feet. So I'm going to change this to 26 inches, I think is what we said. Okay, and that moves that over to 26 inches. So now we're, from this point, from the inside of the door, we're over, and the frame's going to overhang, which you would actually measure to the inside of the door anyway. So you would make your measurement from that point. And I know that it's at that point because this is where my gizmo meets. Okay, wherever your gizmo, wherever these two axes meet, that's the base point that we're referring to whenever we put in numbers, wherever these appear to intersect. And we can move this, but that's for a later video, so we're going to leave that like that, and we've offset that successfully. So let's go ahead and drop a window in here. So the windows are the same processes of the doors. You have to snap just like you would with anything else AEC. So go to the windows, and there's plenty of options here. Let's go ahead and do a case window. I'll hit S to turn snap back on. Zoom in so I can see what I'm doing here, and I'll click again from outside to in. So I'll go do my width, and then I'll do my depth, and then I'll do my height, and click again, and you'll see that cut. And let's say that I want my window to have a height of 3 feet. Let's go and make that 4 feet, and a width of, I don't know, 36 inches or so. All right. Now this thing, let's make this blue. No, let's make this green. There we go. So we're getting into some fancy textures here. All right, so we can see that that's cut all the way through thanks to the snap. So you want to make sure that you can see the whole object, and you can definitely tell when something's cut and when something's not. And it should be cutting through the walls like this. Now, depending on the sill height, you'll notice there's not a parameter over here for sill height, so you actually physically move that where you want it. And anything that you move up in this direction in this view, as you can see, the Z is pointing in the direction that we want to move, so we're going to actually adjust the Z coordinate here. And let's say we have a sill height of like, I don't know, what, 21 inches or something. And you'll see that moves that up 21 inches from the base point, which the base point is going to be represented as that point right there at the bottom of the wood frame. And if you wanted to make the extra calculations, you could do that. But basically, you can rough that in there. A couple inches isn't going to kill you in a max model, unless you're going to, like I said, unless you're going to use this to actually do it like a 3D print, or you're actually going to use this to construct for whatever reason. You might want to take the time to figure that out. But max isn't geared necessarily for that. So we have some precision here, but for the most part, we kind of just wing it. So what if we wanted to enter? What if we knew that we are, let's see, 21 inches from the base, right? So we're 21 inches. What if we didn't know what point we wanted to move it to, but we wanted to enter more like relative coordinates? this little guy here, if I select that, now you'll see this changes to offset mode. So now I can just enter how far I want it to offset. So I'm no longer in the Cartesian coordinate system anymore. So now I would have to enter how far I want to offset it, and that's exactly how far it will offset. Okay, so that's different than having your coordinate system here. So you have to pay attention to which mode you're actually in here, to what you're actually going to be moving and where you're going to be moving it. So you have your two options of your absolute or offset and your Cartesian coordinate system here. So experiment with those two. It changes from view to view. Notice my up, if I wanted to move this in this direction now, it would be Y. In this direction, it would be Z. So you have to pay attention. It might take a couple tries to get used to what you're actually moving here. But definitely use these coordinates. It will help you out. But a lot of times you'll think maybe you're doing something the wrong way because you have to do a lot of math to figure out something. And unfortunately, you're not doing it the wrong way. That's just how it is. If you want it to be precise, you're going to have to go the extra distance with math. All right, so we've added a door and a window successfully. I'm not really going to keep adding doors and windows. I think you get the idea there. You can back it up as many times as you want to. The most important thing to remember with doors and windows is actually using that snap. You need to make sure that you snap to the inside and outside of the wall in order for it to cut through. And if it's not cutting, you're just not snapping. That's plain and simple. Alright, so let's go ahead and wrap up with the walls and windows here. I want to show you modifying these walls after you have them, and adding more walls and so on and so forth. We're not going to do the import AutoCAD thing, I don't think, until next week. So we'll hold off on that for now. So the one thing I want to look at is when you want to add more walls or move walls. Notice you can control the vertex of this point, and you see there's a vertex in every corner. So by moving that vertex, I can control my wall there. So if I wanted to do any modification to that wall after the fact, I can move the vertex there, but again, be cautious that once you move that from being nice and straight, it can be difficult to get back unless you know the exact point. So when you're modeling this stuff, if you actually decide to use walls, be careful to maybe jot down where your location is at that point. So if you need to come back to it, you can type it in, because you can notice here once I start moving that point, now I have a different point, and it's almost impossible to click this back to 15 feet just by moving. With grid snaps, I could do that. I could actually type it in if I remember. That's why I say write it down, and I can just type it in, and I'll be back to straight there. Okay, if I want to, you can see here I have some options. If I wanted to refine, I can add vertices in here. Notice I add a vertex there. I can add a vertex here, and that would allow me to pull this point out. Right, so now I can start to create some shapes here off of that one wall by hitting refine and dropping a vertex in there. So that gives me the ability to do some jot outs and stuff. You can, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory as far as you see there. If you wanted to break, you could break that wall, and now notice that wall broke into two segments. So if I move this, now they're two completely different segments. So break basically separates the two. I'll undo that. So if I have, let's jump to the segment. This is, remember, where we adjust the height and the width of the wall on the segment tab, and you adjust those segment by segment, or you can multiple select by holding down Control. Remember, if you want to do multiple selections there, and you can adjust individual. Like if I wanted the width of this wall to be really thick compared to the other ones or whatever, I could adjust the width of that wall there according to whatever I wanted it to be. Right now, this wall is one solid segment. If I wanted to divide this, let's say, into 3 segments, I can hit divide there, and you'll see that now this wall has been divided equally into 3 segments. Now you'll notice I have some vertices here that I can move, so I can jump back to vertex and select that vertice and move that. Okay, so I can divide my walls using the divide tool. If I wanted maybe 2 John outs there like that. Okay, again, if I wanted, if I wanted to change everything quickly, as far as maybe the height goes, I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to change my height back to 8 feet here, which, what's going on with that? It's not, I thought we made this at 16 feet. For whatever reason, it's not liking it. Let me select everything. There we go. There we go. So we'll drop that back down to 8 feet. 10 feet, sorry. There we go. A little more normal. 16 was a little high. So let's go ahead and look at a couple other things here. Refine is the, that's the same as the vertex. It's going to drop a vertex in there at that split. So refine does the same thing as the vertex refine. It's just under the segment tool. It performs the exact same operation. But when you're doing this, if you wanted, like, for example, this corner to be straight, you're kind of going to have to eyeball it, right? Because we can't really necessarily make that straight. So again, that's the only drawback, and I'm not sure why we can't constrain the walls. I might have to do some special reading on that to see exactly what the reason is behind that, because with your regular spline and line tool, you can definitely hold shift to constrain. Unless throughout the years there's just some key that some secret that I've been missing to be able to do that. If you're watching the video and you do know some magical way to make that happen, definitely leave a comment for everybody so they can see that. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it though, because I usually don't like to use the walls. So last but not least, profile. Profile has to do with the elevation more so than the actual. You can see with the gables here. Let's see. Should be insert there. Move tool. Okay, so I've got to insert there, and insert, and create gable. The specified height here. There we go. So you can see with the create gable there that you're able to do exactly as it says. If you had a house and you wanted that pitch, that's what the create gable is going to do for you. The profile should allow you the extra dot we dropped in here earlier. It's actually staying on the ground there. You can see now I can move the bottom down too with that profile that I added in there before. Okay, so I can adjust the profile of the bottom of the wall there as well. And I can come here and insert a point there and do the same thing up here. So I can adjust this any way that I want to. So the profile, again, like I said, the profile has to do with the elevation of the view. However you want to modify maybe how this shape of the profile actually looks compared to everything else. So and if you wanted to get rid of that point, you can hit the delete here, and that'll take that back to where it was before. So we have a really crooked, crazy house going on here. But you get the idea, I think, maybe, of what these sub-objects contain. And we're not really going to focus on walls any more than this, really, except for when we come to materials and when we start talking about sub-object or multi-materials and sub-object materials, the material IDs. We'll come back to the doors and windows and the wall. So I'll probably save this because I actually almost like this house. So I'm going to save this crazy house. Alright, so when we come back to do these materials, we'll have some windows and walls already created. So this is it for this video. For the next video, we're going to talk about some advanced modeling techniques. We're going to talk about importing AutoCAD files and importing Revit files, importing SketchUp files. We're going to look at our first camera. We're going to look at other ways to create walls. I know the whole time I've been preaching about how I really don't like to use the wall, so you're probably thinking, well, how do you do the walls? We'll look at that next week as well for a quick scene setup. And it looks like, depending on how smoothly that goes, maybe we'll start talking about lighting in the next video. If not lighting in the next video, it'll definitely be the video after that. We'll start talking about lighting, and we'll really start to have some fun with the program. And I was thinking maybe just for kind of like an extra credit, maybe assignment, or maybe just for extra benefit, I was thinking of maybe modeling something. You know how you see the tutorials all over the internet? I was thinking about maybe modeling something specific. So with that being said, if there is anybody out there in class or not in class that has something that they want to model or they're interested in, drop a comment and I will model that in the video, and we'll see how all that goes. That way it's useful to at least somebody, and I'm not just modeling a 3-hole punch or whatever it might be. So be sure to drop a comment if there's something that you want to learn how to model, whether it be a piece of furniture. Try not to do like don't comment and say that you want a transformer, okay? Because I don't have the extra hours to drop on a 100-hour project. Something simple. Let's keep it simple for now while we're learning, and we'll just develop as we go. So I will see you back here next week sometime.